Okay, we're just going to roll anyway. Anytime, Hugh.
Okay. Mr. President, you're being categorized in this episode here as a man of independent cast of mind. And you take your place with other presidents of that nature. Is that a fair assessment of you, that you entered office really feeling that independence?
Well, it's true. I was the first president in more than 125 years elected from the Deep South. I was a governor who had not been involved in any way in Washington. When I began my campaign, there were 8 or 9 others much more famous than I was and who had a cadre of supporters that I didn't have. So I ran the early stages of my campaign as a lonely Georgian, a farmer who was reaching out for personal support, and I built that support around newcomers to politics. When I finally got the nomination, I wasn't obligated to to any special interest.
So that was
groups.
a strength, really.
That was a strength. But then after I got the nomination, I would say burdened with the responsibilities of leading a massive Democratic Party organization with which I had not previously been associated very much. So I went to the White House with my own ideas about what ought to be done in the Middle East, what ought to be done regarding China, what ought to be done about energy, the energy crisis. And as a governor, I had administered the laws that Congress had passed, and I was thoroughly familiar with the defects and assets in these various laws. And I never did fit in really with the Washington environment much, either socially or sometimes
Still the outsider when you...
I was, and I didn't want to be, but I think it was almost inherent in my background, my educational background. I was a military person who had been in the agribusiness field. But I felt sometimes that I was an outsider, but I relaxed with it. But I think that I did have an independent set of mind.
You quoted Kierkegaard, that every man is an exception. What do you mean by that?
Well, I think the individuality of human beings ought to be recognized. We have such a heterogeneous society here in the United States with people from all nations in the world. And as I travel around in Africa and Asia, particularly the small countries, the struggling countries, the fearful countries, the ones that are deprived, they look on the United States as potentially a superpower in every respect, but they feel a kinship with the United States of America even when they don't agree with our government policies because they've got kinfolks here. And so I think the recognition of the worth of an individual is a basic premise on which human rights have to be founded, because as we, including myself, as we look upon ourselves as especially privileged in societal terms or in religious terms in the eyes of God, we exalt ourselves above others. And in extreme cases, we even dehumanize those who disagree with us and think that we are absolutely right. It's where it's a basis for, I'd say, religious and other fundamentalism, where I am right, everyone else who disagrees with me is wrong, therefore they are inferior in the sight of God, therefore what I do to them does not have a moral constraint, and in some extreme cases, as I said, they're almost dehumanized as animals, and therefore okay for them to lose their lives or to be abused.
That was the basis of your human rights program, then.
Yeah, it was a basis of it.
Infused your whole administration. Yeah.
And I think the thrust of it, the vitality of it, was derived from my experience in the Deep South. As someone who grew up in segregation years, who had to struggle through that ordeal of change, and who saw the burden of segregation being equally heavy on white people as it was on our African American neighbors. It was a millstone around our neck. And I saw the advantages of treating people equally. And as I said long before I was elected president in my campaign speeches, that if I am elected, human rights will be a foundation stone for the building of our foreign policy.